Welcome to the Part S channel. Today we explain Genesis chapter 14 in a clear and simple way, step by step. We're looking at a deeply fascinating text today that reads quite literally like an ancient thriller. This is the very first recorded war in the Torah. It involves massive, world-spanning empires clashing over resources, a really high-stakes kidnapping of a family member, and a daring nighttime rescue mission by a remarkably small, fiercely loyal force. We're going to go through every single verse together, step by step, so you can perfectly grasp the sequence of these incredible historical events. Let's get started.
Here's our roadmap for today's explainer. 1. Context and regional war. 2. Lot captured in Sodom. 3. Abram's daring rescue mission. 4. Melchizedek, king of Salem. 5. Abram refuses Sodom's wealth. And finally, 6. Practical lessons and recap.
Section 1. Context and regional war.
Let's dive right into verses 1 and 2, which introduces a massive geopolitical conflict in the ancient Near East. Before Abram even enters the picture in this chapter, the text sets a very wide, global stage. To understand this, we need to look at the key players. We've got an alliance of 4 mighty eastern overlords, led by Chedorlaomer of Elam. Historically, Elam was a massive superpower to the east, and Shinar, ruled by Amraphel, is often identified with ancient Babylon. Standing against them are 5 local kings of the plains, including the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah. Verse 2 tells us directly that these 4 eastern kings went to war against the 5 local kings. It's a massive clash of ancient powers, and the sheer geographic scale of this eastern alliance really emphasizes the overwhelming odds stacked against the local kings.
So, verses 4 through 7 give us the specific timeline and honestly the brutal march of this conflict. For 12 long years, the 5 local kings were subjugated to Chedorlaomer. They were paying him heavy tribute and taxes. In the 13th year, they'd had enough, and they finally rebelled. So naturally, in the 14th year, the 4 eastern overlords marched south to absolutely crush this rebellion. But here's the thing, they didn't just attack Sodom right away. Verses 5 through 7 explain that they marched down the ancient King's Highway, systematically wiping out formidable tribes and giants along the way. We're talking about the Rephaim, the Zuzites, the Emites, the Horites, and the Amalekites. They were literally flexing their absolute military dominance before even turning their attention to their main targets.
As we see in verses 8 through 10, the battle lines were finally drawn in the valley of Siddim. This is where the fleeing kings of Sodom and Gomorrah tragically fell into sticky tar pits while the rest of their forces escaped to the hills. To clarify the Hebrew here just a bit, Siddim comes from a root meaning fields or plains, and the word used for these tar pits is chemar, meaning thick bitumen or asphalt. Picture the chaotic sensory details of this battlefield for a second. You have fleeing chariots and infantry utterly stuck in these treacherous, sticky tar pits. The geography itself essentially trapped the local armies of the 5 kings, leading to their complete and total defeat.
Section 2. Lot captured in Sodom.
Now that the regional war is over and the local kings have been defeated, let's look at verses 11 and 12 to see how this macro conflict deeply affects our main characters. The victorious 4 kings looted the cities. They swept through the region, taking all the goods and provisions. But far more importantly, as verse 12 clearly states, they captured Lot and his possessions because he was living right in the middle of Sodom. If we connect this back to chapter 13, remember that Lot specifically chose to live in the lush, wealthy plains of Sodom. But, well, that worldly choice placed him squarely in the crosshairs of this global war. His actions had very deep consequences, and he basically became collateral damage in an international conflict.
Section 3. Abram's daring rescue mission. The news of Lot's capture reaches his uncle, setting off an incredible chain of events where the focus of the chapter suddenly shifts from global empires right down to a single family's unwavering loyalty. Verse 13 gives us the crucial where and who. An escapee brings the terrible news to Abram the Hebrew, who is living peacefully near the great trees of his ally Mamre the Amorite. The term used here is Abram the Hebrew, or in Hebrew, Iveri. This word literally means from the other side of the river. It signifies Abram's status as a distinct outsider who stands completely apart from the surrounding culture. Yet despite being an outsider, he had successfully formed a secure local peace treaty with Mamre, Eshcol, and Aner.
Now what's absolutely fascinating here is the exact number given in verse 14:31. When Abram hears his nephew has been taken, he doesn't send for a massive regional army. He simply rallies the 318 trained men born in his own household. Think about the sheer tactical absurdity of this for a moment. 4 global superpowers just swept through the entire region, defeating multiple nations and 5 local kings. And now? Now they are being chased down by a single household servants. This drastically highlights the miraculous nature of the victory we're about to see.
Verse 15 details his brilliant tactical execution. Despite being vastly outnumbered, Abram pursues the army far to the north to Dan, uses a nighttime division strategy, and completely routs the 4 kings. We really have to appreciate the immense distance here. Dan is way up in the far north of Israel, and Hobah is past Damascus in modern-day Syria. This wasn't a quick afternoon sprint. It was a grueling multi-day pursuit by a deeply committed Umpel. He strategically divided his men under the cover of darkness to create total panic in the massive enemy camp.
And as verse 16 clearly states, the rescue mission was an absolute success. The absolute key word here is all. He recovered all the stolen goods, he brought back his relative Lot, and he rescued the women and all the other captives. This isn't just a military win, right? It's a complete restoration of the state of affairs before the invasion even happened. Against impossible odds, Abram didn't lose a single person.
Section 4. Melchizedek, king of Salem.
Abram returns home victorious and immediately encounters 2 very different kings in the King's Valley, which is also known as the Valley of Shaveh. Let's look closely at the first of these 2 vital encounters. Verses 17 and 18 introduce Melchizedek, who approaches Abram with physical nourishment of bread and wine for the weary rescue party. The Hebrew here is incredibly rich. Melech means king, and Chedek means righteousness, making him the king of righteousness. The text also says he is the king of Salem, which comes from shalom, meaning peace. Salem, by the way, will later become Yerushalayim, or Jerusalem. So here we have the king of peace and righteousness, stepping out to offer physical refreshment instead of demanding a cut of the spoils.
Melchizedek offers this profound blessing in verses 19 and 20, and he makes sure to give all the credit for this miraculous military victory directly to God. He uses the Hebrew title El Elyon, meaning God Most High, and Konei Shamayim Va'aretz, creator of heaven and earth. Melchizedek clearly recognizes that 318 men defeating 4 unified regional armies is definitely not a natural occurrence. This blessing firmly grounds Abram's success entirely as a divine deliverance.
So the crucial point happens right at the end of verse 20, where Abram responds to this divine blessing by giving Melchizedek a tenth of everything he recovered. In Hebrew, this tenth is called a ma'aser, and fun fact, this is the very first mention of a tithe in the Torah. Abram doesn't keep the massive spoils of war to enrich himself. Instead, he gives the very first portion to God's representative. It's a very public demonstration of his deep gratitude and spiritual integrity.
Section 5. Abram refuses Sodom's wealth.
This leads us right into verses 21 through 24, where Abram faces a much different interaction with the king of Sodom. Notice the stark contrast here. While Melchizedek praised God and offered blessings, the king of Sodom demands the people and offers Abram the looted wealth in return. Just think about the sheer audacity of the king of Sodom here. This is a king who literally just lost a massive war, ran away, fell in a tar pit, and is now making demands of the very man who just saved him and his people. It really highlights the incredible arrogance of Sodom, treating human lives transactionally while trying to use money to buy influence.
Abram's response in verses 22 and 23 is just a powerful oath to God Most High. He says, "I have raised my hand to the Lord." Now, in the ancient world, raising your hand was the exact equivalent of taking a solemn oath in a courtroom. He completely rejects the wicked king's wealth, swearing he won't take even a thread or a sandal thong. Abram wants absolutely zero association with Sodom's corrupt economy. He wants to ensure that no one but God can ever claim credit for making him wealthy.
However, in verse 24, Abram shows incredibly fair, pragmatic leadership. While he sacrifices his own enrichment, he does not force his secular allies, Aner, Eshcol, and Mamre, to give up what they rightfully earned in battle. Because true righteousness doesn't mean forcing your own strict personal vows onto others. Abram holds himself to a remarkably high spiritual standard, but he remains a perfectly just leader who protects the rights of the men who risk their lives to help him.
Section 6. Practical lessons and recap.
Let's move to our final section to see how this all builds into practical life lessons that we can actually apply to our own character today. The simple meaning of this chapter teaches us some truly profound lessons. Ask yourself, how far would you go to rescue a family member who made poor life choices, like Lot did? Abram showed fierce, proactive loyalty. We also learn the importance of giving credit to God for our successes, maintaining our spiritual integrity by rejecting compromised wealth, just as Abram completely rejected Sodom's tainted money. Finally, we must lead with fairness toward those who help us. These are timeless pillars of strong, moral character.
To quickly recap our step-by-step journey through the text today, 4 eastern kings swept through the land to defeat 5 local kings. Lot was captured in the crossfire.
In response, Abram led just 318 men on a miraculous rescue mission. Upon returning victorious, Melchizedek blessed Abram, who then flatly refused the king of Sodom's wealth. From the sticky tar pits of the Dead Sea to the nighttime raid near Damascus, and finally to the King's Valley, Abram navigated both intense physical danger and immense spiritual tests with absolute faith.
This leaves us with a final, echoing question for our own lives. Will we, like Abram, rely entirely on God for our success, or will we compromise our values for the world's wealth? Thank you for learning with us. If this helped you understand the chapter better, like, subscribe, and join us for the next chapter.